Kathleen Wynne was sorry and not sorry. Doug Ford smiled and doggedly repeated his message. Andrea Horwath got and gave like she had a target on her back. The official leaders' debate is in the books. Let's find out how it registered with the voters with Erin Kelly, CEO of Advanced Symbolics, Inc., whose artificial intelligence nicknamed Polly has been tracking Ontario voters' reactions throughout this election campaign. She's joining us tonight from Montreal. And here in our studio, Adam Radwanski, political feature writer at the Globe and Mail, Alison Smith, founder and publisher of the online news service Queen's Park Today, and Marika Walsh, Queen's Park correspondent for iPolitics. Good to have all of you around our literal and metaphorical table in Montreal today. For those who missed the debate, this is the part where we put it all together in a nice, handy-dandy little clip pack for everyone's edification. Sheldon, go.
We don't make mistakes in our budget. We don't make $7 billion mistakes.
Do you have a plan?
We don't cook the books to $12 billion.
We haven't even seen any numbers from Mr. Ford. People started voting yesterday, Mr. Ford. Where is your platform?
We've got to find a way to deal with them, but we can't do it by slinging mud at each other and being dishonest. We have to tell the truth to each other.
When our government comes into power, a new day will dawn, a day of prosperity, a day of opportunity, and a day of growth the likes this province has never seen before.
This is not 1990, and I am certainly not Bob Rae. In fact, he's a Liberal now, but that's a whole other story. I don't want to get into it.
You don't have to be there from 8 o'clock in the morning to 4:30 because we know the government shuts down after 4:30, 5 o'clock.
Oh.
If you work night times, you work afternoons,
Have you ever been to a daycare?
You will be able to.
Apparently not.
4:30.
I'm planning to go down to Queen's Park.
Kathleen Wynne's line. Good laugh from Andrea Horwath. Bit of a comeback from Doug Ford. Let us find out from Erin Kelly, for starters here. You had Polly, I presume, looking very carefully through the 100,000 people that she is monitoring for who won last night's debate. What does Polly say?
Well, I'll tell you who lost, because I think that's the easier one. Polly said this was a very bad night for Doug Ford. It was both Kathleen Wynne and Andrea Horwath were well received. In fact, actually, Kathleen Wynne a little bit higher. I don't know that will translate into votes for her. But we just saw when at the moment when Andrea Horwath said, "Where's your plan? We haven't seen your plan." We just saw social media light up over that issue. And we have been monitoring this issue for weeks now, whether or not the lack of a plan is hurting Doug Ford, and it hasn't been. But last night, we saw 21% of the conversation through the whole night was about this issue of Doug Ford not having a plan.
And does that actually translate into a loss of support or votes?
Yes, it's been significant. Now, what we're seeing, obviously, Andrea Horwath was on a momentum before the debate. Last week, Steve, you and I talked about how she had to get into 5% of Doug Ford's base in order to become premier. We're down to 3% now. So in just 1 week, she's eaten 2% into that base. It's not translating as much into seats again. She's slowly eating away at all of them, but she is definitely the leader with the most momentum, and last night solidified that.
Let's just make sure we understand that. If Andrea Horwath's NDP can steal, if you like, 3% of the PC party's current support, she becomes premier.
That's right.
Okay, got it. Appreciate Polly's analysis. I want to get some human analysis now, if that's all right, too. Adam, you watched the debate. Who helped themselves the most?
I'm off message here, I guess, because I did not think Andrea Horwath helped herself that much. I thought she was fine. She didn't make any huge sort of deer in the headlights mistakes that you might expect from somebody who is, suddenly in first place or potentially in first place after being, a third-party leader for better part of a decade. But I did think she was a little bit off from the way that she'd sold herself through the rest of the campaign, which was a very sunny, optimistic, positive, I'm not like the other politicians kind of message.
Not
and in
quite
this case,
the happy warrior last night.
She wasn't at all, and I thought Kathleen Wynne actually was. Now, it was easier for her because she was, not under fire the way she was in the first debate because the other leaders have basically decided she can't win, which the polls seem to agree with. She had an easier time of it, but I thought they kind of flipped roles, and whereas in the first debate it was Andrea Horwath who was very sort of positive and rising above the fray. This time it was Kathleen Wynne. So I thought she had by far the best night of them. I don't know if it helps her at all, but I appreciated in Ms. Wynne's case that she managed in most cases to try to bring it back a little more to issues people might talk about and a little bit less of just sort of exchanging blows.
Okay. Alison, your view on who helped themselves the most last night?
I actually want to say Doug Ford. I mean, maybe despite Polly's analysis of the social media reaction, I think that if we look at this campaign on a macro lens of where we started with Doug Ford at the top and basically sort of Queen's Park watchers saying this is his to lose, maybe he didn't have a lot to say that was different. Maybe he didn't excite us as, politicos, but what he did is stick to his message. He focused on being the guy who can tell the truth, whether or not, or that he's going to keep his promises, which I think is something that people are concerned about. And he didn't have any gaffes. So if we're looking at what we thought or what Doug Ford needed to do to win this campaign, he's still doing it.
He does get asked every single day, though, where's your platform? Mm-hmm. And clearly that was a message that resonated last night, the lack of a platform.
I also question, there was a lot of Liberal supporters on social media last night on purpose, by design. I wonder, I don't know how Polly's analysis analyzes that, but there were thousands of them pushing under the Liberal platform a rhetoric on social media. So I don't know if that's analyzed in that, but that's something I saw.
Aaron, can you just come in on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's why we do a representative sample of the population. So Polly is not looking at everybody on social media. She's not taking in the whole fire hose, if you will. It is a representative sample of the population. And in fact, we're seeing that the Liberals are down to 1 seat, so we're obviously not being overly influenced by Liberals. So no, the whole reason you sample, and polling is a science where you sample, is so that you are not being influenced by campaign workers and other people with agendas.
Now, last week you told us Toronto Centre was the 1 seat. What is it today?
It's Toronto University, St. Paul's, Toronto St. Paul's.
Toronto St. Paul's. That's the riding we're in right now. That's the one. Okay. Well, and of course that has not taken into account the debate and so on. So we'll see if the numbers continue to move. Let's get you on what happened.
So I think that debates always comes down to what clips and what lines carry over a few days later, right? Once the dust settles. And I think for Ford, the challenge is going to be that daycare line. Because if every mom and dad who has a kid watches that and says, he does not get my life, right?
Because daycare doesn't
close at 4:30. And so for people, if they don't all of a sudden stop seeing that he is for the people or he understands their daily struggles, daycare is a huge struggle for parents. Who's picking up the kid? Who's dropping them off? Are you going to spend an extra $5 for every minute that you're late? Right? All those are big questions that weigh on you. And so for me, that was very a telling moment that clip might last. Now, I still think that the Conservatives are very happy today, but mostly because Kathleen Wynne did so well.
Was there any, Adam, egregious fact check that went unchecked last night that you saw?
Well, that one. I guess it didn't go unchecked because Kathleen Wynne did check it. No, I wasn't so much hung up on fact checks, although I'm sure others might have been, as things that went unanswered, as in just policy questions. And again, I think we are cutting Doug Ford a bit of. We're grading him on a curve, right? And
what does that mean?
Well, it means that we know that he's not very comfortable in this environment. We know that he was objectively pretty bad in the first debate. We know that, in fairness, it's the first time doing this in a provincial context, so a bit of slack would be cut to anybody in that situation, but also expectations are just very low for him on a substance basis. So
they don't expect him to know as much stuff as the other
Exactly, and he knew a little more than he did the first debate, so there was a little more, and he was a little less visibly nervous and a little better, so you could say, okay, well, he was better, and I think he was a little better. And he didn't say anything absolutely, horrible that would end this campaign. But on questions, for instance, on something like climate change policy, it's pretty strange to acknowledge, as he did, that you believe that climate change is real and that it's man-made, and then give absolutely no answers to what you intend to do about it. It'd almost be more intellectually honest to say, oh, I actually don't think it's real.
Let me find out from Aaron about that. Aaron, does Paulie have anything to say about the fact that the Tories don't seem to have a climate change policy?
No, I guess it depends on what you're looking at. If you're looking at people who are not going to vote for Doug Ford anyway, then yes. For his supporters, they're really concerned about jobs, the economy, tax cuts. We don't see so much the people who are committed Doug Ford voters talking about his plan for the environment. I also wanted to mention that Adam said, Paulie found that he was more well received in the first debate than in last night's debate. not because of his nervousness or his presentation. I think people actually kind of found that a little bit endearing in the first debate. It's more that last night he was seen to be exaggerating, he was seen to be grasping when they were asking him, what is your plan? How are you going to pay for these services? And he's talking about, I'm going to reduce this and I'm going to fire the $6 million man. People are getting tired of those lines. They really want to hear that there's a cohesive plan. And people started to talk about, will there be cuts? Because if you're finding efficiencies in the public service, does that translate into jobs? So people are starting to ask those questions, whereas they didn't before.
The one bit of fact-checking I thought we might hear was when Doug Ford said to Andrea Horwath, you've got a $7 billion hole in your budget. And, you know, that seemed like a large number considering that up until now, everybody was saying it was a $1.4 billion hole. Did that resolve itself last night?
It did not resolve itself. I think it's a $1.4 billion annual hole.
Yes.
And I guess he was adding up times four. But does that even, yeah, I guess that equals 7. But yeah, I mean, that wasn't, that didn't, I don't think that
doesn't
hit.
get you to 7,
right,
actually.
well, no, I don't think,
it's 5.
I think it is too. But yes, that was a weird moment. I thought Doug Ford's criticism of Andrea Horwath that kind of I found a little bit more egregious was when they were talking about Hydro One executive salaries and the privatization of Hydro One, and he repeatedly accused Andrea of just sitting back and letting this happen at Queen's Park, when, as Queen Park watchers will know, the NDP has been hitting the government on this consistently, almost on a daily basis since I think 2015. So it's ludicrous to suggest that Andrea Horwath was in favor of this or that her party just let it happen. And that was something that Andrea pushed back at a little bit, saying that's dishonest, Mr. Ford, that's untruthful, but I don't think that that's something that the larger public will realize.
I wonder if there was a missed opportunity, Marika, with the issue of trust, which was the first question in the debate last night, because you know, the 407 and the potential theft of that identifying information to help Conservative nominees get their nominations barely came up at all last night. I don't know why the other two leaders didn't go hard on Mr. Ford on that.
Part of me feels like it's actually not getting traction with voters, that might be why they're not bringing it up more. But I actually didn't think that any of the leaders had a really strong answer on trust. It was very interesting to me because this is something that both Horwath and Ford could really attack Wynne on things like Hydro One, right? The questions around what she did say she would do and what she didn't do and all of that. And so I think that, you know, things with David Livingston being sentenced to jail, there's so much.
McGuinty's chief of staff.
Yes, for sure. But Kathleen Wynne talked about how she helped bring in full-day kindergarten, right? So I think she carries part of that ghost as well, right? I think that there were things missing from all of them on that answer.
I don't remember the last time Adolf Hitler's name came up in an Ontario leaders debate, but it did last night. Sheldon, go.
Unlike the NDP, they have radical activists as candidates, absolutely radical activists that get their inspiration from Adolf Hitler.
Not true,
They get their
Mr. Ford.
they got it
Mr. Ford,
right
that's
there.
not
Inspiration
true.
He needs to
from
be allowed.
Adolf Hitler.
Shame on you.
Inspiration calling our veterans war. You know, they were actually one of your candidates came out and called our veterans war criminals.
Okay, Adam, do you want to start by just explaining why Hitler's name came up in this context last night? Yes. And okay, let's start there. Let's start there.
It came up because there's an NDP candidate in Scarborough who, according to the Conservatives, had in her Facebook feed some time ago a meme that quoted Hitler approvingly. Not a particularly offensive quote, however, it is, you know, attributed to Adolf Hitler. There's a bit of a problem there.
And she retweeted it.
And she retweeted it or put it in her feed, yes. So that was the context of it. It's now been something the Tories have been pressing pretty hard. They've been trying very hard to make the NDP candidates look reckless, look like extremists, etc. That's the best example they've come up with so far, so he's hitting that hard. There's one thing I just want to say on that, and it goes to what we talked about before a little bit about missed opportunities. That question that he was responding to there, where he brought it up, was about workplace power imbalances and about including sexual harassment, misconduct. He's the guy who took over, a few months ago from somebody who lost their job over misconduct allegations. He didn't even address it until the end of the question. I then thought Andrea Horwath really missed an opportunity right after that, because she then got right in the weeds about candidates and didn't say, hey, you forgot to answer the question that you should be answering. Eventually, Kathleen Wynne got to it. But to me, that was, the fact that they got into this sort of back and forth about who had worse candidates, in response to a question that I think a lot of people might, particularly women, might think is a really important question to have raised, I thought was kind of a strange moment of debate that missed what could have been a much more important discussion.
Marika, Ford was definitely on message by saying, you've got candidates who, quote, get their inspiration from Adolf Hitler. Do you think that's a fair accusation?
I think that would be a stretch. I think the problem for the NDP is that they have this unexplainable Hitler meme in one of their candidates' Facebook feeds, and so the PCs can say that, right? And I think the problem for the NDP in this is that it's more, I think, a test of how Horwath responds than of each of their candidates. And I think that Horwath really left people wanting with her response on Friday. In some ways, they were kind of suggesting that there's no way this candidate could have posted it, but they didn't actually say it was fake. And then they didn't even address the part about this candidate accusing Canadian forces of killing innocent people. So I think that there was a lot left wanting in that answer that she gave. And I think Ford was not prepared for the question that Adam is talking about, and so he pivoted to something that he was prepped to attack on.
Well, let's see if Paulie has anything to say, Aaron, about the other two parties, the Liberals and the Progressive Conservatives, have gone hard against the NDP on this issue of you've got a bunch of candidates who are really outside the mainstream. There's the Hitler meme. There's some 9/11 truthing going on. There's another candidate who had some nasty things to say about mining. There's another candidate, Mississauga, who had some, fairly outrageous things to say about Canadian troops and about wearing poppies and all of that. Does Paulie say that that's affecting the NDP's potential growth?
Well, we haven't seen that yet. We were tracking that last night, and we didn't see that became an issue for people. I think certainly if it continues, or if the other parties, as they seem to be keen to do, continue to highlight it, that's probably what they would have to do, is continue to highlight it and try to get Andrea Horwath to make a bigger gaffe in her response. But so far, no, we're not seeing that that's something that is taking hold with people.
And Aaron, let me follow up with this. There was some commentary in the media last night and today about Andrea Horwath looking sort of snippier. What's the word I'm looking for here? A little less happy warrior, a little more bellicose in the debate. And I'm wondering if you're picking up anything that suggests that's costing her momentum, support, votes, etc.
We did see a bit of a reflection of that last night. The numbers showed, as I mentioned off the top, that Kathleen Wynne was best received of the three leaders, and it's quite possible it was because of this, sunnier, more confident, more optimistic outlook. And Andrea Horwath came in second, not too far behind Kathleen Wynne, but given that she has had the momentum up until now, that was a little bit surprising that she came in second to Kathleen Wynne in last night's debate.
Allison, do these attacks on NDP candidates stick in your view?
I don't know if they stick. They stick as far as Ford can play them to his base, from what I can tell. I think the Poppy one is super interesting because we're basically having a veterans conversation in Ontario politics, in an Ontario political campaign, when really that is all the jurisdiction of the federal government. Those veterans and military never come up here, but they do play well to a conservative base. So I think this particular attack or particular social media post by an NDP candidate, whenever it was a few years ago, really landed right in Ford's lap, and that's why he's not letting it go.
The problem is, though, that every party wears some of these issues with candidates. And so the bigger issue is that, I think it just tunes out voters. It disengages voters from the debate.
And that's what Horwath said last night, too,
right,
that this is creating divisiveness and cynicism.
And they see them just as, okay, so now everybody said your candidates are the worst, so now what do?
I also wonder if the Tories are badly overplaying their hand on these things. This is almost every day we get a press release that says something like, shocking revelations of what NDP candidate coming to warrant. Sometimes they're really underwhelming. And then you've got in the debate, you've got him, raising Hitler. You've got him talking not about candidates, but saying, the NDP will be 10 times worse than the Liberals. All of this kind of stuff, which I wonder, he's trying to hurt the NDP credibility, and I wonder if it starts to sound so shrill at a certain point that people think it actually hurts his credibility more. The Tories seem desperate doing it. I mean, put information out there, and the Liberals, for all their other problems in this campaign, have been pretty good at sort of doing these little attacks on their parties where they don't really oversell it quite the same way. They just say, hey, here's the information. The Tories are constantly playing it up to the point where I don't think it hurts the other party's credibility as much as they think it will. I think it, if anything, hurts theirs a little more.
Yeah, if I could
Aaron,
jump
please,
in there
yeah.
a little bit. One of the things we saw last night is that Doug Ford is being seen as somebody who exaggerates. It happened quite a few times last night where people see that, and I think the Hitler clip, that probably wasn't the best one for him to have, the Hitler allusion wasn't the best one. He should have actually highlighted the poppies if he wanted to highlight something in the candidates, because I think that would have resonated better, especially with the base, the older, the veterans. Hitler was just a bit too over the top, I think. Nobody's actually thinking that Andrea Horwath is or most of the NDP are supporters of Hitler. That's just, but the poppies would have been, I think, a little bit more, would have played better.
Marika, I know it is silly of me to expect consistency from politicians on every issue as we go through these things. However, humor me for a second. Andrea Horwath was really in the face of the Conservatives and Doug Ford when the Tanya Granick-Allen videos from whatever it was 4 or 5 years ago came to the fore and insisted that the Tories fire her as a candidate, and they did. Why is turnabout not fair play here?
Because there is a different bar for your party than for the other people's party.
Yeah, I get it now.
That's the thing, right? Yeah. This is why I don't think that any party is winning on this debate, because they are setting a different bar. The Liberals are setting a bar for the PCs and the NDP and a different one for themselves. And every party is doing the same thing. And so I just think it turns into a mush, and I don't think anybody clearly wins on this, and I don't think that you see people really voting on these issues in the first place. Like, that's not what's going to drive you to the polls or drive you away from the polls.
Now, you're a columnist, so you can actually opine on this. Do you think, in order to be consistent, the NDP ought to be firing some of those candidates who have been caught in, let's just call them controversies, in the same way that the Conservatives have dropped a couple of their candidates who've been in trouble?
I was surprised they didn't drop the candidate with the Hitler meme, because it just seems like, even if politics is unfair, that's one of those things where if you posted that, you're probably done. I was surprised by that. I think generally, yes, for consistency, they should be. I wonder, though, I mean, did it really help the Tories to handle candidate controversies the way they have so far? I mean, there is a sense among people who work in politics sometimes that when you give an inch on these things, the other parties will take a mile and they'll just keep going on it. And I don't know. I mean, is the NDP controversy worse because they didn't dump her? Maybe a little bit. They could have made it go away faster.
But the Tories haven't set the same bar either,
no,
right?
They've been
they
very
got rid
consistent.
of Tanya Granick-Allen, but not Andrew Lawton. And
Yeah,
they
and
have,
Michael Harris.
They have
yes,
not
they've been very
explained.
inconsistent. I agree.
I don't think they've been consistent either. And so, yes, we might want our leaders to be consistent, but none of them have shown that consistency.
Do we have to say, in fairness, that the Liberals and the Greens have had the fewest eruptions of these kinds around? I mean, I haven't seen any of their candidates come out with anything so egregious that it warranted firing.
Well, I think that the Oppo parties are not really digging into the Greens, to be honest. Okay. So that's probably the reason for that.
Fair enough.
And the Liberals, I think, had a longer period of time to nominate some of their candidates, not all of them. There was also less controversy within the party. The Liberal Party is more organized than the PC party. Spoiler alert, I don't know if any of you knew that. I think that the attacks, just speaking of whether or not these candidate attacks are sticking, I mostly think no. I think they make good Toronto Sun newspaper covers that appeal to some people. I think the attacks that Ford is making on Andrea Horwath about calling, he's really trying to paint, and I think Wynne, to a certain degree, actually with her back to work legislation sort of flip and push last night, is they're trying to remind or make Ontarians think that the NDP is a really left-wing, radical, socialist, out-there party that people, especially people that have voted Conservative in the past, would be out of their minds to vote for. They'll annihilate the middle class. They'll be 10 times worse than the Ontario Liberals. They're risky, they're radical. These are the type of things that I think actually will stick with voters that were considering or are considering voting for the NDP.
Well, you know, Aaron, I actually saw Bob Ray last week, and I wanted him to refresh my memory on how things went in 1990 when at the leaders' debate, now he was in second place at the leaders' debate, he had a good debate, and then he ended up at 44 points in the polls just before Election Day, and the Liberals of the day ran one of these, there's going to be children starving in the streets if you elect the NDP government, and it did work. They depressed his numbers down to where he ended up with 37.6 percent on Election Day. Have you got any indication of whether or not this kind of scorched earth, the NDP, is going to bring you misery, it's going to rain cats and dogs if you put them in, whether that can work this time around?
It doesn't seem to be. You know, even when Andrea Horwath had her gaffe with the budget, we didn't see people, you know, getting very, very concerned about it. Obviously, it was discussed, but, you know, I think people are really resonating. I think we're not seeing that people are concerned about it. In fact, we're seeing people who were traditionally PC supporters now starting to look at Andrea Horwath, and, you know, not at the Liberals, at Andrea Horwath. So they're obviously willing to consider that the NDP, especially if they can talk about helping small business and things like that, which is like the cornerstone of the economy, I think those people aren't seeing them as a radical group. Okay, let's talk some more about the Premier, because she started the debate in a most unusual way with an apology, which you don't normally see. So let's start with that. Go ahead, Sheldon, roll it.
Here's what I want to say about the last 5 years. Sorry, not sorry. I'm really genuinely sorry that more people don't like me. But I am not sorry about all of the things that we're doing in Ontario to make life better. I'm not sorry that we're covering tuition for 235,000 students. I'm not sorry that we're protecting the environment. And I'm really not sorry that we're no longer asking single moms to raise a family on $11.40 an hour.
Adam, what'd you think of that?
I didn't like it particularly. I thought she was very good in most of the debate. In the context of the debate, at least, I thought that, you know, she was strongest when she was fairly natural. That seemed really shoehorned in, and it was obviously a line they wanted to get out in her opening statement. I thought she did, it seemed a little awkward coming out of her. I think the bigger problem to me was that it's about the 8th different sort of line or campaign-saving line they seem to have tried, and both specifically as a line and also as an angle. I mean, originally they were running on, you know, we're sort of activist and we're going to, things aren't perfect, but we're going to improve them. Then they've sort of shifted around to things are actually pretty good and we're doing lots of good stuff. I mean, they keep sort of trying these different angles. And, you know, when you're 10 days, 11 days from an election, I think it does sound a little much. Now, I would say it made the clips, I think, and that, you know, for better or worse, they obviously wanted that to be what came out of it. And maybe when it's not in the context of an hour-and-a-half debate and it's just one line, maybe it lands a little differently than when you're watching them last night.
I think watching it actually, even now, I totally agree with you. There's this change in the messaging arc. If you look at each of their ads from the last week, it's changed from it's not perfect to I can do better to sorry, I'm not sorry. But when you watch that clip, she doesn't look natural. She doesn't look like she means it. She actually kind of looks kind of defiant in a way, maybe. And when in the post-debate scrums, she wasn't ready for the next question to come from saying, voters don't like me, which is, okay, so why would they vote for you then? She wasn't ready for that answer.
She did have an answer for that, though, Allison. She did say, look, if all you want is somebody who's likable, okay, but there's more to being Premier than being likable. There's having the right plan, good solutions, good candidates, et cetera, et cetera. That's the message she's trying to sell with that sorry, not sorry, I think.
Well, and what she's trying to sell and what she tried to sell in a few of her different answers last night in the debate as well as in the scrum is, I think, even keel. The Liberal Party, you might not like everything we did, but we're the safe choice. And she kept saying we're practical, we make compromises, and we kind of come out with the fairest solution. So yes, maybe sorry if you didn't always like that solution, but not sorry because we were the ones that were very responsible with making it. Now, that's not a snappy campaign slogan.
It's tough. It's hard to get all that on a bumper sticker.
Yes. No. But what it might do, it's the Liberals, you know, going out swinging, I think. They might know that they don't have a chance, but it's like they're saving face in a way, I think.
Well, having said that, Aaron, you've already told us that Polly kind of liked what Premier Wynne had to say last night. What do you think about the possibility of this sorry, not sorry tactic getting her back in the game?
Well, I don't think it'll get her back in the game and that she'll get more votes, but certainly the people we've seen throughout the campaign that people's ambivalence toward the Liberals is not Kathleen Wynne personally, it is the policies that they brought in. They're really being judged because of their handling of the energy file, energy prices going up, how they reacted to that. So it's really not about Kathleen Wynne personally. So I think her apologizing, saying, well, you don't like me, that's actually not the issue. But like I said, her message last night did resonate with people when she reminded people that they brought in that they brought in pharmacare for children, that they brought in full-time junior kindergarten, reminding people of the good that the Liberals did, even if people didn't agree with everything they did. That definitely resonated with people. People got that message, so I think it was good that she got those things out, and she didn't just do it at that point in the debate, she did it throughout, where she kept reminding people of the policies that they brought in, and definitely people heard that. Is that going to be enough to get them back in the game? We're not seeing that at this point.
Okay, we've got about a minute left here. Adam, I want to ask you this. It's unusual, I think, for so many ex-premiers to have had their names invoked in a debate. Somebody from the floor asked a question about the ghosts of Dalton McGuinty, Mike Harris, and Bob Rae. Do premiers of that long ago have an impact on people's choice this time?
I'm skeptical. I think for the NDP, they might have the biggest impact because, look, there's only been one experience with the NDP. It was not a good one. It is easy for Andrea Horwath, I think, to brush that off, and she always does this by mentioning or alluding to the fact that Bob Rae is not even a Democrat anymore. But I think it does give some pause because there's no other experience. Otherwise, no. I mean, the Liberals, obviously, they've been in power a long time. Past premiers, don't, other than maybe Dalton McGuinty, don't matter too much at the moment. In the Tories' case, look, there are people who are still, particularly around unions and elsewhere, who are still very put off by Mike Harris. But how many Ontarians at this point are, of voting age, born in Ontario or raised in Ontario, et cetera, who would actually remember them? Quite a few, but it's a different province from what it was, 15, 20 years ago.
Mike Harris got elected 23 years ago.
It's a quite different world, and people have switched parties all the time. And we've seen, in a federal election the last federal election, we saw that a Liberal Party that had a bad brand, new leader, suddenly nobody cared that much. It's not hard to change these things. I think they're much more going to be judged on their own merits, and I think the Tories' problems in this campaign have a lot more to do with Doug Ford than they do with Mike Harris.
Last few seconds?
Yeah, well, because I think Kathleen Wynne framed the Mike Harris argument in a very interesting way. She said, I remember when I was raising my kids, they couldn't go to school a lot of the time because teachers were on strikes. And I think that
Political
actually,
protest.
Sure.
Political protest,
okay.
that's what they called it.
All right, thank you, fact check. But I think that was actually a play to speak to millennial voters, because I was in elementary school during the Mike Harris years, and I remember periods of extended political protests where we didn't get to go to school, and it was weird. And I think that there's talk about how there's a lot of millennials that have the option to vote right now. And I think Wynne's framing of the question that way, of like, hey, remember when you were at school and you couldn't go to school and you liked school, and you were out. I think that was an interesting and kind of unique way to frame the ghosts of premiers past.
As I thank all of you for being on the program tonight, I especially want to thank you for reminding me that you were in elementary school while I was covering that election campaign. Yikes. Okay, Aaron Kelly in Montreal, great to have you on. We're going to see you again before Election Day on June the 7th, because, of course, you're going to tell us how this is all going to work itself out. So we look forward to that, Aaron, and thanks for joining us tonight. And here in our studio, Marika Walsh from iPolitics, Adam Radwanski of the Globe and Mail, Allison Smith, elementary student from the Mike Harris days, now with Queen's Park Today. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.